Alrighty.
Hey,
How are you today, sir?
I'm doing quite well.
So, I think we're just going to dive right into it this week. Last week, we discussed the creation of the Cannabis Control Board.
Yes.
This week, we're going to talk about their powers and functions. We did gloss over a little bit about the creation of the Office of Cannabis Management.
Yes.
So we completed the creation of the Cannabis Control Board, and if you remember correctly, I said that the Cannabis Control Board actually has three divisions. There's
Right.
the board itself,
Okay.
there's the Office of Cannabis Management, and then there's there's the State Advisory Board.
Okay.
Okay, so there's three different offices that are created by Article 2 of this chapter. So we're actually now going to start to get into some real stuff. I did want to just finish up with there's a few brief sections around the establishment of the Office of Cannabis Management that we didn't read. It's not as long as
Right.
complex
Okay.
as what we discussed last
Let's
week.
get
So
into it.
I don't want to skip. I'm almost inclined to skip it,
No.
but I think let's just do this verse by verse, right?
Yeah.
So, the establishment of an Office of Cannabis Management. There is hereby established within the Division of Alcoholic Beverage Control an independent Office of Cannabis Management, which shall have exclusive jurisdiction to exercise the powers and duties provided by this chapter. So you remember when we started talking about this, I said, well, there is a relationship between the liquor board, which
Right.
already exists.
Right.
So the Cannabis Control Board is a separate entity that was created, right? But the executive wing, right? The office the Office of Cannabis Management is essentially the executive branch of the Cannabis Board. So they're the boots on the ground. They're doing the hard work, and apparently they're going to be within an established agency.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a liquor board which for decades has been handling, the most popular intoxicant, regulated intoxicant. So it makes sense to put it under, it's going to, as I say, it's going to be independent,
Right.
but they already know how do you regulate it, how do you license it, how do you tax it, all those sorts of things.
Theoretically, they could have created everything within there.
Right.
Right, but they didn't do that exactly, which is why I think their nuanced approach is very interesting, and why I kind of am singing the praises of the
Right.
New York legislature, because they really thought this through. They've created an entire independent agency that's new and innovative and has powers and functions that haven't been addressed by the legislature as of yet, and then they also are incorporating an agency that presumably knows what it's
Exactly.
doing.
So they're leveraging with the already the systemic knowledge and saying we're going into something new, but let's not invent everything totally from whole cloth. Let's leverage the institutional knowledge that we already have, and then move forward and in where it needs to be independent, let it be its own entity.
Well, you mentioned institutional knowledge. I think it's more, I don't know what you mean by that exactly. I think it's more about like actual knowing how to process 100,000 license applications.
No, that's what I mean.
That's what you
Institutional
mean?
knowledge, that as an institution,
Okay.
the liquor board has been handling this. They
Right.
got everything from bodegas that sell beer to wine and liquor stores. They've been doing this. How do you vet them? How do you certify them? How do you license them? How do you tax them? All this sort
And
of
they
stuff.
have the human resources that they
There you
can
go.
draw from, which we spoke about at some length last week in terms of how they're sourcing their talent,
Right.
the testing procedures necessary, how they're classified in terms of collective bargaining. So here we have basically, something that's within an existing entity. And then it talks about the office shall exercise its authority by and through an executive director. Just as the board has a chairman of the board,
Right.
this office has an executive director. So the executive director, the office shall exercise its authority other than powers and duties specifically granted to the board. So there's things that the board does itself,
Right.
that is not delegated to the executive director within the Office of Cannabis Management. By and through an executive director nominated by the governor and with the advice and consent of Senate. The executive director shall serve for a term of 3 years, and once confirmed, may only be removed for good cause with appropriate notice. The executive director of the state office of cannabis management shall receive an annual salary not to exceed an amount appropriated therefore by the legislature. So remember, some of the other positions were very clearly spelled out.
Right. They put a number on it.
Right. The members of the board.
Right.
They put a number on it in terms of what they're making a day. Here they're saying it depends upon a number of different factors and ultimately what they decide to pay them.
Right.
So presumably it would be more, right? It would be a high paying job.
Yeah. You're kind of running the show, so obviously you need to be duly compensated.
Expenses actually and necessarily incurred, so they get reimbursed for their expenses, unless otherwise provided by the legislature. Okay. So I said all of that because I didn't want to. I wish we had kind of covered that last week.
Yeah.
But because this week we're going to get in. Now we're going to get into the subject matter that I've been really planning for this whole week. So now they're getting into what we've just discussed is they created this agency, these
Right.
agencies, and who these people are. I think we probably should have talked about their powers and duties before discussing, how the organization is structured, because what they're ultimately responsible for speaks to how many
Right.
people do they need, what
Exactly.
are their right. So this is how I want to begin this discussion. What do you think the Cannabis Control Board should do? And then we're going to talk about the powers that are actually delegated.
Right.
And I think and now you're going to see why I believe the legislature has really balanced competing political interests
Right.
and just the exigencies of what's necessary to get the job done.
Right.
But let's think about it. What would Clarence Thomas say? What would
I don't know if I can adopt his mindset.
Well, I'm just saying, what would an intelligent conservative mind
Right.
say? What would an intelligent
Yeah.
liberal mind say?
Well, assuming they accept the fact
Yeah.
of legalization, I think they would say
Right. Assuming they accept the fact of legalization,
Right.
we're drafting
Yeah.
the statute,
Right.
we're creating an office of, a cannabis man. What powers and responsibilities and duties should
Well,
they have?
first of all, the terms and conditions of what it takes to be licensed to grow, distribute, and also have spaces in which it could be consumed.
Yes.
The restrictions and limitations thereof,
Mhm.
age limits and things of that nature.
Yep.
What the qualifications are for being licensed in the various things. How many licenses there would be made available, probably how much they would cost, what
Mhm.
would be the actual paperwork, what's the procedure of applying for a license and determining that you qualified for it, and how do you determine, because obviously more people are going to apply for licenses than are going to be able to get it. So what is the process of vetting, to make sure that you don't have favoritism or nepotism or inside dealing and that kind of stuff. Not being an expert in this or anything, or really haven't thought about it that deeply, those are the things that come to mind.
I was a much more thorough, well thought out response than I was expecting from you. You missed one thing,
Okay.
only one thing,
Okay.
that I think is probably it's to protect the existing operators
Oh, okay.
and the end consumers. But one thing that's I think easy to gloss over is the marijuana operator himself, the marijuana seller himself. Since we've been incarcerating him for the past, century and a half, it's easy to forget that was a mistake. And now we have to actually shift our view and say, let's treat this person as an honest citizen and an honest member of society.
Right.
And, how do we collect taxes from this person? How do we protect these people as a class?
Right.
So it's ultimately, I think that the role of the legislature is to protect the marketplace as it exists right now. That's
Right.
the one thing you did not say.
Right.
However, everything else you said, that's pretty much exactly, I think, what you
Right.
would want from it. I don't think it's spelled out in as much detail in other statutes, and I think that the New York legislature really kind of touches upon everything that you said. So
Now,
we're-
one thing
yeah.
I find fascinating before you go further is,
Mhm.
as a born-again capitalist, as I
Mhm.
often say, and as a pragmatic individual, I tend to look at this from simply, okay, now it's legal, how do we turn it into a viable business so that people can conduct it properly?
Mhm.
And you might think, being a dreadlocked black person who smoked weed for 40 years, up until, about 5 years ago, you'd think that I would be mindful of the fact that, they've been throwing people into jail for decades behind something that they're now not only legalizing, but acknowledging that practice was a mistake. And the fact that the legislation and the legislators are actually addressing that inside the act, I'm not going to say I'm amazed, but
I'm amazed. They're bending over backwards
Yeah.
you're going to begin to see that the legislature is bending over backwards to protect the people who have been operating within this marketplace for the past 20 years.
And full disclosure, obviously we have done our homework. This is an ongoing conversation between Sean and myself for months, and we've done a little bit of due diligence. We've looked at what some of the other voices out there in the world and in the community, particularly in the black community, have to say. And we have seen that there is a good deal of cynicism. I don't want anybody calling me a seller or any of that sort of bullshit. That they're saying, well, okay, it's already skewed in the advantage of the people who are in it, is particularly the people who have medical licenses and those who are fully capitalized, so they're going to be able to get a head start. And while I can't say that these things aren't true,
Real concerns, legitimate concerns.
But what we're here to distinguish is we're not talking about the real politic or the currently existing zeitgeist. We're specifically talking about the MRTA,
yes,
which is designed to try to, is it a panacea? Is it a perfect, is it a magic wand? Of course it isn't. Is it something that has been consciously drafted to try to, as insofar as a single act of legislature can, address these things? It's our position that, yeah.
Well, to piggyback on that a little bit, it's like I have had several conversations this week with several different people who are in the business, and from a 20-some-odd-year-old kid in the projects across the street to someone who's been doing this for 20 years who has other legitimate businesses, and this is supplementing her income, and both of them are approaching the statute and the legislature. Well, they're scratching their head saying, what should I do right now?
Right.
But it's certainly not like I should trust the government or that they have my best interest at heart,
right,
or if I do what it's almost like they're confronting forces that are beyond anything that they can control or begin to deal with, and that fate is going to sort them out, and there's not anything that they can do to protect themselves right now. I'm saying that the legislature is bending over backwards to protect the people who are already in the industry, and that what you have to do is meet them halfway.
Yeah.
You have to incorporate. You have to begin to pay your taxes. You have to begin to approach this business the way you would approach any other business.
Right.
And I know that that's scary. That's not something that, the thing that's nice, I suppose, about selling marijuana is it's very easy. The market has been very aggressive. All you have to do is, buy it for $1 and sell it for $2, and you can supplement your income by doing it that way. Now we need to begin to take a much more professional approach to this. Those who are able to do that will go from making what they are currently making now, which is between probably $30,000 at average to maybe $100,000 a year for people
really
to making 10 times that at least. I think that's what the numbers we're looking at. And then this is where we haven't really talked about what you're capable of or what you're doing, because people have to pay us.
Right.
But we do have a plan in place for what you can do right now to begin to migrate away from the street toward the marketplace generally, where in all jurisdictions where it's legal, which I think obviously is the internet is what we're talking about.
And in addition to the fact of things like automating, things like dealing with electronic transactions, because look, not everybody's got cash. People got a swipe card, and if you don't want to go to a FDIC a vetted bank, there's ways you can do it. You can do it with Bitcoin or whatever have you. There are already
PayPal.
Point of sale systems. But see, even PayPal, some people might feel that's in the system, whatever. But all those points withstanding, I want to make it clear to those who are watching this podcast and this series, the reason we're doing a weekly series, and I'm especially speaking to the black and brown folks out there who have been doing this, who are still in what we now are calling the gray market, because it's not a black market anymore. But our motto, take you out of the gray and into the black, meaning into the black financially. Okay? Don't deal yourself out of the game based on historical cynicism and the fact that historically, let's be honest, the system and the government and the popo have not been on your side. What we're saying is this act is drafted to address those. And you can sit there and be cynical and watch as the whole world shifts and the market shifts, and the reason you're left on the sidelines is because you did it to yourself. What we're saying is We're not saying we trust the government. We're saying we're taking the government at its word until it proves otherwise.
And you're going to begin to. We've been saying more or less the same thing for several. This is our fourth episode now. But now now that we're diving into the powers and responsibilities of the board, and we're not talking about introductory remarks anymore.
Right.
We've been spending a lot of time talking about introductory remarks. Now that we're going to dive into the actual meat of the legislation, you're going to see begin to see the steps that they are taking to protect you.
Right.
So,
because we're neither naive nor uncynical. So the reason that we have this view of it is a very well-informed opinion. This is why, in fact, we're going to sit here and read through the whole damn thing, because we want you to see it from the perspective we see it, to understand this isn't just blowing smoke. This is something you should take seriously, and we feel that it's worth investing a couple of hours of our time on a weekly basis to do this, to bring this information to you. Of course, you make your own decisions, but make an informed decision.
Because I think a lot of people's conclusions are based upon ignorance.
Yes.
They're not taking the time to actually read the statute. And if you actually do, you'll find that it's not as complicated as you thought it was. It is accessible, okay? And a lot of the fears and apprehensions that you may have had are not only addressed in the statute, but are really addressed in such a way that your comfort level, everybody in the marijuana business should be able to take a breath right now and say, okay, it's time to relax. You have about 12 to 18 months to wrap your brain around what's going on and plot your next move before the next step in the process.
And to use a simple metaphor, you don't go running around blindly in a dark room because it's dark and you can't see what the hell's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But when you turn the light on, then you're able to negotiate around with greater ease and greater speed. And this is what we're saying. Mm-hmm. Don't be in the dark about this and operate, well, I'm sure this is not going to work because you don't know. Turn the light on, read it, or watch our podcast and hear what it has to say. And then make your own decision, but make an informed decision with the light on, with illumination as to what this act actually says and what it can do and provide for you.
So let's turn the light on, shall we? Powers and duties of the Cannabis Control Board. There's about 22 or 23. We're going to get through as many as we can today.
Right.
All right? I'd like to get through...
Let's see if we can get through all of them.
Let's see if we can get through all of them. The Cannabis Control Board, or board, shall have the following functions, powers, and duties as provided for in this chapter. And then it goes to list them. Number 1, and this is exactly what you said, discretion to issue or refuse to issue any registration, license, or permit provided for in this chapter as follows. And then it begins to list the mechanism. We're going to gloss over that to a certain extent, because there's a process by which the Office of Cannabis Management makes a recommendation to the board. The chairperson then says yay or nay. If he says nay, the rest of the board can demand a full hearing, and it spells out a process around which there can be an appeal if there's an unfavorable determination. But essentially what point 1 says is that they have the discretion to issue or refuse to issue any registration or license. And then it goes into some detail around that process.
And basically with things like this, we can cover it at a high level. And then if, folks out there in the comments, if you say you want us to go into anything in a particular detail at a future episode, we'll come back and we'll do that.
Well, like for instance, a preliminary determination by the chairperson shall take effect 14 days after it has been issued by the chairperson, provided that no...
We don't need to go through
well, like I said, I did go through that. I've explained that there's
you're the lawyer.
Right. Well, that's the thing. That's why you want to, you don't necessarily need to understand the all of the mechanics around which they're, but you do need to understand their powers and duties. So they can, like you said initially, they can refuse to issue any. They're the ones who issue a license. Okay. Number 2. Sole discretion to limit or not to limit the number of registrations, licenses, and permits of each class to be issued. Now, I personally, after having read a lot of the legislation and thought this through, I don't think they should put a cap on the number. They don't know how many they should be issuing. There should be objective criteria that if you meet, they issue the license. Now, some of those criteria might be hard or soft. For instance, there's certain citizenship requirements, state citizenship requirements.
Right.
But basically, what I think is if you can demonstrate to them that you have a certain market share and you've been in operation for more than a year,
Right.
and you're inclined to pay your taxes and be a good citizen, I think the presumption should be to issue a license,
Yeah.
and that they should see, how many licenses they
Right.
need to issue.
And this is an interesting
know.
point, because especially some of the cynical voices that we've encountered out there in the wild, as we mentioned earlier, are under the assumption that there's going to be a fixed number of licenses. The game is already rigged, and the big boys with money have already gotten.
I don't like to interrupt you, but
No,
but to
please
speak
do.
directly to that point, the next thing that they say is licenses and permit of each class to be issued within the state or any political subdivision thereof, in a manner. Now you notice how I just want you to get a sense when I'm kind of speaking quickly.
Right,
it's
right.
like this is legalese. This is what they're saying is the state or any subdivision of the state. They're basically saying anything that can possibly be considered to be related to New York.
Right.
In a manner that prioritizes social and economic equity applicants, with the goal of 50% awarded to such applicants, and considers small business opportunities and concerns, avoids market dominance in sectors of the industry, and reflects the demographics of the state. Now,
let's go over that.
let's think about that for a second,
Yeah.
because
listen
that's
to what that just said.
yeah.
Half of the licenses are going to be set aside to balance the social inequity of black and brown people being thrown in jail, and to avoid what we just were referring to is folks with lots of money coming in and gobbling up the game. And this is written in the language of the act itself.
It's written in the language throughout the act itself. It's not just there. It's in a lot. We're going to see it. But this
And also that final clause, to reflect the demographics. Read that part again.
Okay, and then I have a question for you. Right, let's read it again. So they have the sole discretion to limit or not to limit the number of registrations, licenses, and permits, right? In a manner that prioritizes social and economic equity applicants with the goal of 50% awarded to such applicants, and considers small business opportunities and concerns, avoids market dominance in sectors of the industry, and reflects the demographics of the state.
Reflects the demographics of the state. Okay? Basically, they're saying we're going to look at what New York looks like, and we're going to make sure that the distribution of licenses reflects who's out there, not who's got the money, but who's actually out there applying for the licenses. Now, here's the thing. Any act, any action, any intention only goes the way that those who are enforcing it are compelled to do it. And this is, and again, I got to say this, this is why Sean, because this is all Sean's idea. I'm happy to be a part of it, but this is Sean's idea.
Well, you had a few. You've helped me think this through.
Yeah.
thoroughly.
But exactly. But I
I was
say
the
that,
one who said to you that, hey, this is something we should
Yes.
examine. But
Yes.
but in terms of coming up with a business
Yes.
plan and how we want to
Yes.
approach the market
Yes.
and what we want to do,
Yes.
a lot of that's
Yes.
you.
And I
Yeah.
say that to say this. The reason he has us doing this is his attitude is don't wait for the 12 or 18 months for them to figure it out, because they may fuck it up.
Right.
We now have the opportunity to compel them to do what they should do, what they ought to do, and what this act says they're going to do.
Because what people say they're going to do and what they ultimately do are oftentimes
Yes.
very contradictory. And I think they're doing they're doing everything in their power as of right now to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, if we don't come together as a
Yes.
class and do the right thing ourselves, then
Yeah, if we don't hold their feet to the fire, they're going to do what all politicians do, because that's just inertia. They're going to bend to the will of the people who compel them, which is usually the people with the most money.
So 50% should be awarded to, what they're calling social and economic equity applicants. We're going to talk about the definition of that later
Right.
on. But for
And
right,
you have said, not to interrupt, but
Yeah.
you have said, and the cynical voices out there have said, both, that they don't think 50% is enough. They don't think that's equity.
well, what I think is that you want to protect the marketplace as it exists right now, and you want to limit as much as possible out-of-state opportunists from taking what should ultimately belong to the state.
Yeah.
Right.
And some of the most cynical voices have said that, hey, if you're acknowledging the fact that the enforcement of marijuana laws when it was illegal have disproportionately affected a certain class of people, then the distribution of licenses should reflect that same imbalance.
Well, what I'm saying also now is let it be 100%. The statute's not saying that it won't be or
Right.
that it can't be.
It's saying at least Ah.
This is why one of my plans is I don't want to charge people $30,000 to write an application for as many people as I can write applications for. I want to produce a YouTube series explaining to people how to fill out the application themselves
To get as many applications out there
right.
as possible.
From us.
Yeah.
From the well, I am very broadly defining social and economic equity applicant to include basically any operator within the state who's been in business for more than a year. You know, the natural
Yeah.
Marketplace as it already exists.
The folks you've been buying your weed from, if you don't get it from a dispensary, let's just call it what
right.
it is.
Whether
folks.
they're black, whether they're white, whether they're minority owned or not.
Whether it's the dude on the corner standing outside the subway, or the person who you page and they meet you on the corner in a car and you drive around.
I just don't
Y'all
want
know
to.
how it goes.
I want to make them millionaires. I don't want existing millionaires to come in and take the
Yes.
market share from them. So I'm speaking. You know,
You've put in the sweat equity. You might as well benefit from the social equity.
So my plan is to empower that class as much as possible to submit the applications themselves and explain to them exactly how to go through that process. That's my business plan for the market is in a nutshell.
Okay.
But we're not there yet. This is why there's so many. That's 18 months from now.
Right.
So what do we do right now? That's the question, right? That's the question
Yes.
that we're trying to answer. Obviously, getting a license is very important, but what do you do right now? That's the question we're trying to answer.
Okay.
So
Moving along.
moving along now. So the board can say we're going to issue 1,000 licenses, 10,000 licenses, or we're not going to pick any number at all. I hope that that's what they do, at least initially, because they
Yes.
don't know how many.
And you watching this video series right now can influence what decision they make.
Correct. Because don't forget, the government works for you. They're
Thank you.
elected by you. They're paid by you. They work for
Representative government.
you. Number 3, sole discretion to revoke, cancel, or suspend for cause any registration, license, or permit issued under this chapter, and to impose a civil penalty for cause after notice and an opportunity for a hearing against any holder or a registration, license, or permit issued pursuant to this chapter.
So basically, if you screw up, they can pull your license and give you a penalty with due process.
With due process. So if you get let's say you get caught, or you get a ticket for selling to a minor, for instance, that's an infraction. Well, you can say that you'll have an opportunity to defend yourself, but the important thing to note is that it will not be in criminal court, it will not be in Supreme Court, it will not be in family court or
almost missed
federal
that.
court. It will be
Civil court.
it will be in a tribunal that
Right.
within the either the Office of Cannabis Management or the board itself. Probably the board itself.
But it specifically said civil penalty in that language, if I heard correctly.
Yeah. Well, then they talk about other other types.
Now,
of
of course,
infractions.
let's be honest. If you sell beer or cigarettes to a minor, that's a crime.
Well, no, isn't that's civil? You
Oh,
gotta,
is it?
Yeah. They don't
Oh.
get they get hit with the intense civil penalty. It is a
Okay.
crime. It is a crime. It is an infraction. But again, it's you go before the liquor board.
You can get your
don't-
liquor license pulled or something like that. And
No.
you're probably going to pay a penalty.
Right. I mean, I think to like go beyond that, I'm trying to just imagine what kind of conspiracy would be necessary. But you have to.
I mean, if you were like 3 blocks from a high school and you were selling to like 20% of the student body knowingly,
Right.
yeah,
Right. Then you're dealing with a little bit more than a civil infraction. But what they're saying is like, look, in the course of your doing business, if
Yeah.
you're, not paying your taxes, if you're selling to
Something like that,
minors,
right.
if you're not observing the protocol, and then they're going to talk about the other protocols that you're going to have to observe, then these are the people that you're going to have to
Right.
answer to. There's a process. There's there's an opportunity for a hearing and to defend yourself.
Okay.
And then number 4, this was something that you said specifically in our initial, when I asked you what they
Summation,
should
right.
be doing. To fix by rule and regulation the standards and requirements of cultivation, processing, packaging, marketing, sale of medicinal cannabis, medical cannabis, adult use cannabis, and cannabis product, and cannabinoid hemp and hemp extract, including but not limited to the ability to regulate excipients. That means stuff that doesn't get you high,
Okay.
essentially. By the way, all of these words that cannabinoid hemp are spelled out in the definition
Right.
of terms. But the thing is, they're using the ordinary definition of the term. When I read this, I didn't feel a need to go back and go through a definition, including but not excipients and the types, forms, and concentration of products which may be manufactured and or processed in order to ensure the health and safety of the public and the use of proper ingredients and methods in the manufacture of all medical adult use cannabinoid hemp and hemp extract to be sold or consumed in the state, and to ensure that products are not packed. Okay, so they explain basically they can just set standards and regulations for how cannabis is processed and sold, whether it's an edible, whether it's something that you're smoking, whether it's some oil that you're using to cook with or put in your hair. They can set the standards in terms of how it's to be handled.
Like wine, you want to make sure there's no benzene or adulterants that
or food itself.
Exactly.
Or just
it's a
food
consumable
itself.
substance. Now, one thing that I'm hearing in that also, and this is something I want to point out to the viewers out there, is they're not just talking about the weed that gets you high, and I don't mean the distinction between that and cannabinoids or oils.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, remember, hemp is an incredible fibrous substance.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? You folks, especially you folks, I'm not talking to you who are dealing it, to your clients who are getting high, but for you, those of you who are growers, there are opportunities beyond simply growing weed for medicinal, for
construction,
yes.
Even for construction, like making houses with hemp and stuff. We're going to do another, or I'm going to do, or you and I are going to do another series around, not just around the legislation, but business opportunities and business strategy, and we're going to get into that. But your mind is in the right direction.
Because when Sean is talking about marijuana millionaires, he's not just blowing smoke or having a pie in the sky dream. If we frame your mind, this is why he constantly comes back to this point. This is a business opportunity we're talking about. This isn't just an opportunity to get high and it's legal and you can twist one up on the street. I mean, that too. But think beyond that, especially if you've been in the game for 5-10 years.
This is an opportunity to make meaningful demonstrations toward reparations, is what we were talking about. That's the types of numbers we're talking about. And to go back to last week, where they forecasted their annual tax revenue at $300 million a year, we laughed and said it's more like $1 to $3 billion a year. So let's not,
because Illinois projected in a few years $2 billion in tax revenues. Illinois, as a state, has a population that's only 1.5 times the population of New York City.
Right.
So if that state is projecting billions within 2 to 3 years, something like that, come on.
But we're going to get to that because they have other, in terms of the functions and powers that we're going to get to, analyzing numbers and crunching numbers is part of that. So they're going to figure out their mistake very quickly. But again, so what we're talking about, number 4, in terms of their powers, it's to fix by rule and regulation the standards and requirements of cultivation and manufacturing. We said, it's
sort of like a marijuana FDA.
Right. And it said to ensure that products are not packaged, marketed, or otherwise sold in a way which targets minors or promotes increased use or cannabis use disorders, because they're recognizing that, no, we're not trying, look, the people who smoke marijuana, the market share that already exists, it is what it is. But do we really want to encourage
a nation of burnouts,
more people to smoke? We've said
or people to smoke more than they do.
Let's not forget that cannabis use disorder is a real thing, and cannabis use among minors is a real problem that we want to, and drug use generally. Yes. I mean, if I had a kid, I'd be much happier that they were smoking marijuana than smoking crack, but
True.
I wouldn't want...
You wouldn't want at 13 to be smoking anything.
Right. Okay, number 5. To limit or prohibit at any time of... This is an interesting provision. At any time of public emergency and without previous notice or advertisement, the cultivation, processing, distribution, or sale of any or all cannabis products, medical cannabis, or cannabinoid hemp and hemp extract for and during the period of such emergency. Do you understand what I just said? I don't think you do.
I understand that they're talking about certain emergency situations where they could curtail or stop it. But I don't understand what emergency situations would justify it.
I don't think you're supposed... Well, that's the thing. This is a catch-22. This is the catch-22. This is where they're kind of saying...
Cynics, listen up.
Yeah, well, right. This is kind of where there's... Well, but let me tell you something. in every code, in every law book, there's always a catch-22, where in unforeseeable circumstances, emergencies, they can do what they need.
Oh my God! I'm a state legislature and my kid's getting high. This is an emergency.
Well, I'll give you an example that was related to cannabis recently. If you remember the THC derivatives, the spice, and
Yes,
that was turning
yes.
people into zombies on the streets of New York. So that's basically, these are drugs that were not scheduled by the FDA. They flooded the streets of New York. They wreaked havoc and created all.
They were supplanting normal weed for a while.
Well, because they were much cheaper. So for like $10, you can get half an ounce, whereas you would have to spend $100. So they became very popular among the homeless and the poor communities, and they were really messing people up. So what did the state do? They found a way to. I don't know exactly the mechanism or how they went about it, but they got it off the streets. And you know what? Thank God. So in emergency situations, the state can do what it needs to do. It's spelled out in this statute. Like you said, what circumstances justify that? You always have to be careful. This was, I think, their catch-22 and way of protecting themselves in unforeseeable emergency types of circumstances.
To avert the zombie apocalypse.
Right. Number 6, this is also very important. To hold hearings, subpoena witnesses, compel their attendance, administer oaths, to examine any person under oath, and in connection therewith to require the production of any books or records relative to the inquiry. A subpoena issued under this section shall be regulated by the civil practice and rules. So that means if there's any hearings, any trials, any tribunals related to marijuana, it's going to be under the board. And the rules that will be in effect are the civil practice laws and rules. Those are New York's rules of civil procedure. There are federal rules of civil procedure. They differ from state rules of civil procedure. If we remember recently the Cosby trial, there were a lot of witnesses that were testifying to essentially prior bad acts.
Right.
And I mention that because the rules of evidence concerning prior bad acts vary from state to state.
Okay.
How Cosby's trial would have gone down in other states might have been different. They might not have allowed those witnesses to testify.
Right.
What I'm saying is New York has specific civil practice laws and rules as contrasted by different states.
And also this is very important because, as those of you out there may know, there's quite a conflict between the states that are legalizing marijuana and the federal government, which has a much more draconian approach towards the legalization of marijuana than the several states, the 18 states now that have fully licensed it, legalized it for recreational use, and I think it's twice that number that have it legalized for at least for a medicinal purpose.
Yes, but what I would say also is that whatever state it's going to be legalized in, they would want to include that language that the rules that would govern in any tribunal.
My rule, my house, my rules.
My house, my rules. So if it's in Jersey, it's going to be under the New Jersey, whatever, I forget what it's called, the New Jersey Civil Practice Laws and Rules. It's just saying, if you're a lawyer and you have to have a case that you have to deal with, that's the law book that you're going to refer to when you're thinking about what witnesses you're going to call and what evidence you're going to produce. Number 7, to appoint any necessary directors, deputies, counsels, assistants, investigators, and other employees within the limits provided by appropriation. In other words, they're going to have a certain amount of money, so they can't just hire 10,000 experts at $100,000. They're going to have, they're going to ask the state for a certain amount of money. They're going to have a plan. They're going to say, we want to hire these people, etc.
So basically, consultation will not become a boondoggle.
Yes. Now things going to get a little bit tricky. Directors, deputies, and counsels, including the chief equity officer. We're going to talk about that later, but this is very interesting. I don't think any of the other jurisdictions have a chief equity officer. California talks about the social and economic equity applicant. Did they have an officer in their board of cannabis management to ensure that those provisions of the statute were being adhered to? I don't think so. I don't know for sure, but New York, spells that out, and it's spelled out here. Now this is where things get a little bit complicated. So, and the chief equity officer and confidential secretaries to board members shall be in the exempt class of the civil service. Do you know what that means?
No, I do not know.
Okay. So that means that they don't have to go through any of the standardized testing procedures that other government employees have to go through. Okay, so if you want to be, I mean, I don't know, I don't work in government, but with the,
No, but there are the GS ratings. I mean, government service. So there are standardized civil service tests and stuff.
like the cops have all
Exactly.
kinds of civil. They're not in the exempt class of civil service. They're in a very.
Right.
They have to take specific tests if they want to be promoted. They have to take certain tests.
Right.
For collective bargaining, they're assigned to, and so this is how the state manages, their human resources. So that's what that means.
Okay.
The other assistants, investigators, and employees of the office shall be in the competitive class of the civil service and shall be considered. Again, that means they've gone through a testing procedure.
Right.
And be considered for purposes of Article 14 of the Civil Service Law to be public employees of the state and shall be assigned to the appropriate bargaining unit. Okay, so that's kind of how they're classified from a human resources standpoint. There's essentially two different types of employees within the board and the executive office, and that is, they've either gone through the competitive class or they're in the exempt class.
Right.
All right. The exempt class means that they might hire guys like you or me. Well, we have interests
Right.
in marijuana industry, so they wouldn't hire us. But let's say they might hire someone from Harvard,
Right.
as an expert, right?
Right.
Well, hopefully Columbia or NYU or CUNY, not Harvard.
Just
right?
say.
Investigators so employed by the office shall be deemed to be peace officers, cops, armed men, right, and women. Only for the purposes of enforcing provisions of this chapter or judgments, so they can't just do
Right. They don't
it's-
have full arrest powers, so they're not going to pull you over for a ticket or.
No, but they do have arrest powers. Is what
No,
we're
I mean
saying.
full arrest powers.
Right.
If you snatch somebody's purse, that's not in their purview.
I think if you snatch somebody's purse in front of them, they're probably going to do
Yeah.
something. But make a citizen's arrest or orders obtained for violation thereof with all the powers set forth in Section 2.20 of the Criminal Procedure Law. That's what defines what force cops can use, when they can use deadly force. The whole Eric Garner situation where they applied the illegal chokehold. I believe that comes from Section 2.20 of the Criminal Procedure Law. Employees transferred to the office shall be transferred without further examination or qualification to the same or similar titles and shall remain in the same collective bargaining units and shall retain their respective civil service classifications, status, and rights pursuant to their collective bargaining units and collective bargaining agreements. So that just, again, it's explaining how they're organizing. So there's, they spoke of the board members,
Right.
The voting members.
Right.
But now they're going to have God only knows how many people actually doing the work,
Yeah.
right? How big is this office going to be?
Right.
How many hundreds of people are going to be
Right.
there? I don't know. What do you think?
I couldn't even estimate.
How many
I couldn't
people are in
even
the liquor
speculate.
board? I
Right.
don't know.
I don't
It
know
might
either.
be it might be 1,000 people.
And it sounds to me what they're saying is that the rank and file they can pull out of the civil service ranks, because you could like civil service is kind of like the military service in which you have a certain rank and a certain status. Like I said, there's a GS and there's a number that comes out of it from 1 to whatever it goes up to. So say you were in a different department and now I want to be on this marijuana board, this cannabis board. If you're in the competitive class, your seniority in the civil service pool will transfer with you. But once you're in there, what it sounds like they're saying is then you're in a different way of determining where you go, and they say no further testing or anything like that.
That's it. Well, you're asking the right questions, and this is where I think it gets complex, and it's not really of too much concern to the marijuana operator.
Yeah.
This is more of concern to if you're working within the Office of
Exactly.
Cannabis Management or the board. How are they supposed to treat you, and how are you supposed to get paid?
How do I get seniority? How do I get promotions?
Right, and that'll speak to if there's any disagreements or power conflicts within the organization. So it's relevant for that reason. But in terms of the person selling marijuana on the street right now,
It make no difference.
the only thing that where it does become a little bit important is the next provision. So there's some more details around that we're going to skip. Up until this point, the executive director shall appoint a deputy director for health and safety, who shall be a licensed healthcare practitioner within the state and who shall oversee all clinical aspects of the office. That's one of the specific positions that's enumerated within the statute.
Right.
Most of the positions are not. They're saying do what you want based upon how much money you get from the Senate. That one's spelled out. Okay, number 8. This is a short provision, and it speaks for itself. To inspect or to provide authorization for the inspection at any time of any premises where medical cannabis, adult use cannabis, or cannabinoid hemp and hemp extract is cultivated, processed, stored, distributed, or sold. Period, end of sentence.
Yes.
See, but here's the thing. That means that they can come whenever they want
2:30 in the morning.
to take a look at what's going on. And if you ever spoke to anyone who tried to manage a restaurant, the health department can come in and shut your lights out pretty much without notice. The code is so long and complex and impossible to adhere to every
100%.
single that they can pretty much harass anybody that they want at any time. So, do they do that? No, but as a libertarian, I don't want, when I read something like that, I get a little bit like, oh, they can kind of come in and poke their nose around at any time. I don't know. I shouldn't they have to give some kind of notice?
Yeah.
We're coming in the next 48 hours.
Yeah, get your shit together.
Yeah.
But and see, anyone who, as you said, the restaurant industry is a perfect example. As anyone who's ever worked in a restaurant knows, you straighten up and fly right and dot your I's and cross your T's and pass the white glove inspection to get that A rating. A month later, will you pass with an A rating? Probably not. Are you going to be poisoning anyone? No.
Well,
Now we know that how things work amongst human beings is some places, if they want to fuck with you and shut you down, they can do so. And in other cases, if the right pieces of paper cross the right palms, you can get somebody to look the other way. So will that happen in here? Honestly,
we don't know. Like we said,
we don't know. But I gotta say, once this is in full effect, probably, because of human nature. Nothing to do with the legislation, the statute. It's just that that's what's going to happen because we're talking about New Yorkers, we're talking about human beings, and eventually anyone who has a position of a little bit of power.
But then let's keep them honest.
Exactly.
And the way we keep them honest is by doing what we're talking about, coming together for the purposes of collective bargaining. That way, if they harass you, they harass everybody.
Yes.
They'll be less inclined to step out of line.
But be aware, and this is why it's interesting to read even this section, is basically it's an inspection, and especially those of you who are in the restaurant business, have families in the restaurant business, you know both sides of the tale. Mm-hmm. Somebody who, they knew the inspectors, so they gave them a little leeway, or they just wanted to mess with this particular place, and they gigged them hard, and they shut them down when somebody down the block is kicking rats out of their their kitchen. And
well, this is how you harass people, from a state level.
Yes.
If you one thing that the courts have discretion over, generally speaking, is whether they hear a case in the first place. The Supreme Court has they don't have to listen to any case that's presented.
Right.
They
choose which cases.
They choose which cases. So they could, for instance, we could file a brief before the Supreme Court right now based upon some demand for national legalization on whatever grounds.
Right.
Okay, and they could toss it out. And typically, what happens is that's exactly what they do until they're getting so many of them that they realize the issue is right. This isn't going away, and we want to hear this particular case because it's emblematic of the type of cases that is being presented.
And if we're going to set precedent, this is the precedent-setting case.
But the point is that even a local court is they can turn a petition away because you didn't cross a T, you didn't dot an I properly. They don't like you. So there's always room for the state to harass people and apply the law in an unjust manner.
Yeah.
I'm highlighting it and dwelling on this because I want everybody to just be mindful of it so that this is one of the areas where you would want to look at. Okay? Are they being unfair in their application of the standards and you want there to be standards, and I'll tell you why. When I like edibles. When the packages say 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams, 600 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams, that isn't worth the paper that it's printed on. The people who produce it, they do their best to make the best batch that they can. They say they eyeball it and they guess. And you'll eat
50 milligrams maybe.
You'll eat an edible that says 300 milligrams, and boom, you're on your face for 5 hours. And then you'll eat like one that says 1,000 milligrams, and it doesn't really do the job. So you want that to be clear. You want to know if I buy a edible that says 1,000 milligrams, that's what I'm getting.
Basically, it's just like the analogy is, if I buy 80 proof scotch, I want to know that it's 80 proof and not 150 proof.
Right. So you want in order for them to be able to do that, they have to be able to inspect and provide authorization for the inspection. To do what they're saying here.
Right.
Otherwise, they have no teeth. But you don't want them to just
harass
or begin to use that as a way to push out a certain class.
Right.
I mean,
and this is why this is coming up in some of the reading. This is why you, the viewer, have to be mindful of this. Again, as we said before, we'll keep saying this. You have the power to determine how they enforce what they force, but you can't do it if you don't know.
It's arbitrary and capricious right now in certain respects.
Yes.
I'll tell you who's being harassed right now. My African, the guy, when I only... I'm sorry. I have to now disclose some of my own habits around marijuana. So on Broadway and 26th Street, around between 26th Street and 30th Street. No. I'm sure they're happy to get the new business. That's where you go to. That's where you go to get it done.
Those of you in the New York area, we're just saying.
And then Canal Street. That's where you go to get a $10 bag of weed. And they're.
Those of you token on a discount. Listen up.
Well, if you don't have $30 to buy an eighth or $50 to buy a premium eighth, you go to the street, you buy $10. So they're getting harassed right now. The cops are still arresting them and locking them up. But if you go down to Washington Square Park, you got people with tables selling weed right next to the cops. That's why. So why are they arresting the African vendors and they're not arresting the people in
who
Washington
are boldly
Square Park?
displaying it?
So there's already an arbitrary and capricious enforcement of the gray area of the law. So this is what we have to be mindful of, and why we need to come together for purposes of collective bargaining to make sure that we, when that sort of thing happens, we see it and we deal with it in real time. I don't have any power now to negotiate with the district attorney or the legislature because we don't have the class. We're not representing the class of people that I would want to be.
Right.
But that's what has to happen in order to be able to combat.
Now, some of you guys and gals out there want to go to these areas, and everyone's walking around with a video camera now. If you just want to give these folks a visibility shield. And just be out there and film what the cops are doing and say, hey, why are you harassing those guys? I can go up to Washington Square Park and there's people selling stuff.
I have to control myself from doing that sometimes because it's so outrageous what they're doing. So
if one person does it, they can shut you down. If 100 people do it, that's what we're saying.
We're dwelling on that because it's a reoccurring theme for us in terms of our business strategy. The reason why we're going through the statute is there's a method to the madness. We're trying to empower people in real, meaningful ways. We have a business plan in place. We have a strategy in place. One of the most essential aspect of our strategy is coming together for the purposes of collective bargaining. So when we come upon provisions in the statute that highlight the necessity of one of our strategic initiatives, we will dwell on it for a minute or two. Okay, moving on to number 9. So we're not quite halfway through their delegated powers. We'll keep going for a little while, and then we'll see.
What did you say? There were 22? So maybe
22,
we'll go
23.
halfway through.
Yeah, we'll go for a few more, and we'll see. Some of these are short. To prescribe forms of application for registration, licenses, and permits under this chapter, and of all reports deemed necessary by the board. So, the application form, they're the ones who do that. The ones who actually go through the process of collecting it from people, that's the Office of Cannabis Management.
Okay.
That's not the board. That's the executive. We'll get there. 10. To appoint such advisory groups and committees as deemed necessary to provide assistance to the board to carry out the purposes and objectives of this chapter. Interestingly, what we're going to see later is there's a whole thing spelled out in the statute of a state advisory board. So what I just said is separate from and in addition to the state advisory board.
Okay.
So they're taking what that shows you is that the analytics is a big part of what they're planning to do.
Okay.
So to the extent that they might have made certain mistakes as of right now, I believe that they will clear that up. Hopefully quickly. All right, I lost my place for a second. Okay, number 11.
No, 10.
Well, 10. That was 10.
Oh, okay.
To appoint such advisory groups and committees as
Okay.
deemed necessary. Okay.
Number 11.
Number 11. To exercise the powers and perform the duties in relation to the administration of the board and the Office of Cannabis Management as are necessary, but not specifically vested by this chapter, including but not limited to budgetary and fiscal matters. I'll be very honest with you. I do not understand what that means. So I'm going to read it again, and maybe you can help me to understand what that means. To exercise the powers and perform the duties in relation to the administration of the board and the Office of Cannabis Management as are necessary, but not specifically vested by this chapter, including but not limited to budgetary matters. I think it's another catch-22. I think what they're saying is that to do everything that's not specifically spelled out in this statute,
Right.
including budgetary matters.
Right.
But I don't like it when they do stuff like that.
That's like a catch-all provision.
I don't like catch-all provisions. I really don't. So it's like if they're, and especially in the middle of the list, I don't know why they put that there or what that really means. Unless you have something to say about it, we're going to put a pin on it and maybe revisit it as a questionable power that is not immediately clear to me. Number 12. The rest of them are very clear to me. The rest of the provisions are very clear to me. That one is not. Number 12. To develop and establish minimum criteria for certifying employees to work in the cannabis industry in positions requiring advanced training and education. Well, like in food service, there's criteria you got to go through if you want to handle certain types of food.
There's OSHA in construction and things of that nature. There's certification boards in technology that
and people hate them.
CompTIA.
And people I know construction workers who hate OSHA.
Yeah.
They're like, I know I don't need to take a 10-hour or however many hours certification. I've been doing this for 20 years. It's like so this is probably something that's going to piss people off. I suppose the challenge for the board is to make it meaninful and not just some meaningless exercise in regulatory compliance, like you were saying, which OSHA is, I think, many times a meaningless exercise in regulatory compliance.
Yeah, and except for the things like that prevent people from having a ladder improperly posted or getting something dropped on their head. I mean, are some of the excesses of does it get picayune? Yes, it does. But if you've ever been a laborer in a construction site,
I have.
Yeah, that sometimes they can play fast and loose. I mean, I've seen.
What happened in Florida recently?
Yeah.
Well, like that. Well, but I don't think OSHA and the training seminars that the workers are going through.
A lot of that is just time-consuming nonsense.
And just so the state can say we did something to help enforce, but it's not a meaningful The reason why people, in terms of construction, it's like there are actually codes and regulations that they have to adhere to, and then there are inspectors that if they don't adhere to the codes will slap them with a fine. So that's the way you enforce the compliance with the safety regulations. So we're going to see. Again, that's a challenge for the state.
And then they got to work it out. This is all stuff in planning. And I mean, obviously, like so many things, OSHA started with the best of intentions. People are doing things improperly. Safety and Health Administration, I think is what it stands for.
Yes.
And so people were just doing things wrong. But you know what? What you really need to do is to make sure that they're properly trained to supervise. How do you do that unless you are at every site? So then they come up, we'll have training. But training is meaningless if it's not implemented.
Right.
And so a lot of times people just have to go through these things to get the certification.
Right.
All that says is I went to this class.
Right.
Doesn't say I'm going to do a damn
That's what
thing.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's not going to do a damn thing. It's not actually going to have a meaningful effect in terms of how they do their job. So the challenges for the state is like, okay, to the extent that you want to do that, make it meaningful.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. All right. Number 12. to develop and establish minimum. I just wanted to make sure. Yes. No, we said that. Excuse me. 13. To enter into contracts, memoranda of understanding, and agreements as deemed appropriate to effectuate the policy and purpose of this chapter. So, again, if we come together for the purposes of collective bargaining, and they enter into any type of covenant, related to marijuana, it's going to be with them. It's not going to be with the governor. It's not going to be with the Speaker of the House. It's not going to be with the sponsoring senators. It's going to be with the board, and probably the chair is the one who's going to put his signature on any contract. Okay. 14. To advise the Office of Cannabis Management and or Urban Development Corporation in making low interest or zero interest loans to qualified social and economic equity applicants as provided for in this chapter. Now, the actual loan application process and more details around the loan, that's spelled out in subsequent chapters. But the point is, even at this preliminary stage in the statute, they're making it very clear. If you are a social and economic equity applicant, they are bending over backwards to help you. One of the ways they're going to bend over backwards is to give you money.
Right.
Is to act, so right now, what can you do right now? You could get that money from the state.
And I can hear the cynics out there saying, yeah, that's easy to say. But here's the thing. You can't get a loan you don't apply for. Okay? So if they're saying that there's going to be monies out there and your attitude is, yeah, right.
My credit's shot. I don't have the credit. Well, okay.
Then who are you mad at? But this is why Sean is saying from now, don't wait the 12 to 18 months. Do everything you can to make yourself a qualified social equity applicant.
I'm saying one of those things is you can apply for a loan right now that has zero interest. What other loans can you apply for to get zero interest?
Something from the federal government, maybe.
Maybe.
Inside of the COVID thing.
No, but what this means is that even if you have bad credit or no credit, if you incorporate, if you say that these are special circumstances, even if you think there's no way you could ever get a loan under any other circumstances, you can get a loan right now.
And again, now this is my constant refrain, and I say this every episode. The root word of reparations is repair, and the responsibility, the obligation to repair is us, those who have been the aggrieved. You don't look to the snake that bit you to provide the antidote.
Right.
Okay, and if this is just going to be rims and tims and bitches and hoes and you're just waiting for the government check at the first of the month, need not apply. The government, the system, the man, whatever you want to call it, their obligation is not to make repairs. Their obligation is to provide the means and the mechanism for us to make the repairs we need to make. So get on this. Position yourself to be a qualified social equity applicant and apply for the damn loans, apply for the grants, do whatever you need to do. Position yourself and take advantage of it to build an enterprise.
And not for nothing, but that mitigates against any cost that we might charge you as the marijuana consultants, as your attorneys and business advisors.
Factor that into the cost of doing business.
Right. So the point is that this is a very real and very meaningful way because I keep saying that the statute is bending over backwards to help the New York marijuana operator, that they're doing the right thing. How? Show me the money. Okay, right here.
Boom.
That's where the money is. Okay, incorporate and apply for the loan right now. Well, assuming that you meet the criteria for social and economic equity.
And also petition the government, petition the board to make them do what they say.
Right.
Because as we saw in the earlier points, how many licenses, who gets it? It's at least 50%, but it's flexible. Well, how does it flex? That's up to you.
And that's how public we make it, right? If they can do everything without facing any type of scrutiny, it's going to go one way.
Exactly.
If it's in front of the public...
Bring the heat. Hold their feet to the fire. Stop sitting around and complaining that the government, they just do whatever they want to do. Don't let them do that. Speak up. Get in their faces. Whoever you got to do, if you got to, and this is something I said in the 2016 after the 2016 election. Get in touch with all your assembly people, your city council person, your state senator, whoever, and don't just call on the phone and don't just send emails. Send telegrams. Why do I say that? It's easy. Look, I can delete 1,000 telegrams with the click of a mouse. but 1,000 telegrams on my desk?
Well, you know what?
That's
though?
hard to ignore.
I'm going to suggest that we put a pin in that sort of tactical consideration, because once we come together as a class,
Yes.
then we can start talking tactics.
Yes.
You know, then
Agreed.
if we have 100 people that we're working with, and for instance, the state does some unjust thing that we contemplated in this episode, such as not issuing a license or not issuing licenses to a class of people, then we will do the type of thing that you're talking
And
about.
also, here's the thing.
Yeah.
Take that point, but let's also flip that. Why is it that we only talk about reaching out and communicating with the government when they do something we don't like? How about when they do something we do like? Give them a shout out.
Well, again,
Send them an
right.
attaboy.
Well, that's the approach that I'm advancing, and the posture towards government that I'm advocating is see them as your friends, because these guys are our friends. Like the people who sponsored this bill. This is not George Bush. This is not Dick Cheney. Liz Kruger is not Dick Cheney. Liz Kruger is your mother. She is a sweet woman who has the best interests of the New Yorker at heart and is trying her best to do the right thing. You might not agree with every
Right.
piece of legislation that she passes, but come on. This is not this is someone who you should look at and say, ooh, this is my friend. This is the state as the parent. The
Right.
state is the role of
Right.
as the protector.
And again, this is not that we're saying that anyone's any saviors or saints or anything like that. But as Sean is saying, who the government is, a lot of it depends on your attitude. And also, if you politely and courteously remind them that they work for you in cooperation and not in conflict, you can make
Yeah.
things happen.
Right. And I think they would respect that and encourage that. I mean, I think the people who drafted this I think we're doing everything that they would want to see us do. That's the
Yeah.
other reason why I'm doing this, is
Yeah.
because I think this is 100% consistent with the intention of this particular statute. Everything that we're advancing. All right, number 14. Let's keep going for a couple more,
Yeah.
and then we'll see. To advise, we said that. Number 15. If public health, safety, or welfare imperatively requires emergency action, this is another provision around emergency action, and incorporates a finding to that effect in an order, summary suspension of a license may be ordered effective on the date specified in such order or upon service of a certified copy of such order on the licensee, whichever shall be later, pending proceedings for revocation or other actions. So they can't just come in and do whatever they want to
Right.
do without any type of proceeding.
Right.
There is a proceeding. Even if they declare an emergency and they take
Right.
emergency action, there's still due process.
Still interested in what defines an emergency, but
I would have liked, again, actually, that's a very interesting point. See, so what happens in a situation like that, like this, is nothing, maybe. There's never an emergency, so we never have to
Right.
figure it out. Or we're confronted with a lot of different types of emergencies. So then the court then has to say, okay, what constitutes a legitimate emergency? And then they
Right.
say, okay, that is an emergency, that's not an emergency. And then after years and years of court precedent and whatnot, then the court will have the clear rules that the courts have. This is how we define an emergency: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Right.
It's either within those categories, and we will respect it, or it's not, and we won't. Look, I hope that we don't see too many emergencies,
Right.
and that this provision is never really fleshed out through precedent. These proceedings shall be promptly instituted and determined. In addition, the board may be directed to order the administrative seizure of product, issue a stop order, or take any other action necessary to effectuate and enforce the policy and purpose of this chapter. So this basically is like, if they want to come in and seize $1 million worth of product, that's the provision under which they would do that.
Right.
Okay. 16, very short. To draft and provide for public comments and issue regulations, declaratory rulings, guidance, and industry advisories. So this is, again, like if we have a question, as operators, like, hey, can I sell to Colorado on the internet? Boom. We go to them and say, hey, can you issue a declaratory ruling on this? And they'll say, okay, if you want to do that, this is what you have to do. You have to use UPS and not FedEx. I'm just saying,
Right,
for
right,
instance,
right.
they might spell it out that specifically.
You know, or send it over a land route that does not involve the crossing the borders of states. So, who knows?
If you're confronted with any type of question,
send it by air so it doesn't travel across these. Whatever. Who knows? I'm just making shit up.
you can approach them and ask them to clarify, and that's one of their functions, right? Number 17, to draft and provide an annual report on the effectiveness of this chapter. Okay, then I think we're going to summarize a lot of provision 17. 17 is a very long section because it spells out exactly what's going to be included in the report. And again, this is distinct from the advisory committee.
Right.
That's also the state advisory committee. So what they're going to be doing is spelled out later on in this article as well. So there's a lot of redundancies around reporting, analytics. They're very mindful of trying to collect as much data as possible. So again, this goes. It talks about let's go through a few highlights here.
Okay.
What's going to be included here. So. Number of registrations, licenses, and permits, the economic and fiscal impacts associated with the chapter, specific programs made by the Cannabis Control Board, demographic data on owners and employees in the medical cannabis and adult use cannabis industries, impacts to public health and safety, impacts associated with public safety, any other information or data deemed significant, and then the board shall make recommendations regarding the appropriate level of taxation. So we don't even know how they're going to be taxing this stuff right now. That's a very important lingering question.
Yeah.
Okay, and then it goes on to when they should when they want to do this. They want to do this by January 1st, 2023, and annually thereafter. That's when we can expect to see the first report. Now, if you were a lawyer. If you were a business person, I would suggest paying a little bit more attention to that report. I'm going to eagerly be looking for that report, especially in terms of how many licenses they're going to be issuing. Okay.
And basically significant to the average Joe out there is that there's going to be information. And it's easy to look at all these sort of government reports as just reams and reams of useless information, stats and numbers that are going to make your eyes bleed. But don't ignore the facts, the figures, the numbers, the information you can get. Because remember, information is useless unless you use it.
Right.
And as Sean is saying, he's going to want to know. I want to know how many licenses. I want to know the boots on the ground implementation of this. Because in 2023, this is going to be beyond just a bunch of words in legislature. This is going to have been in practice, hopefully, for a year.
Well, and
we're going to see what does that look like.
And the last thing that I said in terms of their intention to do it by 2023 shows you that, look, we have a little bit of time to act here. Again, we have 12 to 18 months before they start issuing licenses. We have until 2023 before they start issuing reports analyzing what's been going on. So
Right.
so you have a little bit of time to act, but not an infinite amount of time.
Yes.
So now is what you want to really be doing this summer is thinking about what your next move is. Do you actually want to stay in this industry? If you do, you need to start approaching this like a real business.
Come up with a game plan.
But approach it like a real business.
Yeah.
No more of this, I understand that this is attractive to the high school dropout, to the college dropout.
Yeah. Hey, lots of very successful multi-million-dollar corporations have been founded by high school dropouts.
Sure. And what in order to approach this as a legitimate business doesn't require doing anything that complex. So,
and let's face it, if you are out there and you have been making most of or all of your money selling weed, let's just call it what it is, and you've been also managing to stay out of jail, then you already are running a business.
Watch and talk to us for an hour and tell me that your revenue doesn't double within 3 months. Like if it doesn't, if because that's what I'm telling people. That's what we're promising people. And if that turns out to be bullshit, then I have to accept the consequences of that. But that's essentially, Cornell and I have a plan follow our plan, and tell me that your business doesn't double
Yeah.
within the next 90 days.
Start running it as a business and not as a side hustle.
Start running it as a business and not as a side hustle, and watch your revenue double within the next 90 days. We're approaching the end of the statute.
Yeah,
we're gonna get through the rest of it today. Okay. So the report. Okay, number 18. When an administrative decision is appealed to the board by an applicant, registered organization, licensee, or permittee, issue a final determination of the office. Does that mean it can't be appealed in the New York Supreme Court? Does that mean you can't appeal it in federal court? I think you can always appeal. You can always find grounds for it. One trick in the law is like you want a judgment to be final, right? Not a trick in the law. That's not the right way to say what I'm saying. But when defining the jurisdiction of a court, for instance, if you and I enter into an arbitration or a mediation agreement, what that means is we agree not to sue each other in court should there be a disagreement.
Right.
But you want that arbitration decision to be final. And it is, usually, unless something outrageous happens. So I think that's what this provision means, that if, let's say, you apply for a license,
Right.
they deny your license application, you appeal, you go through the trial process with the board, you lose, unless they've done something so outrageous, unless they've denied you an application because of the color of your skin, or because of your gender, or because of something so profoundly ridiculous.
Like that guy's lisp.
No, I think they could do it for that. Lisp is not a protected class, actually. I think, in other words, they would not be able to deny an application because of the color of your skin. I think, literally, interpreting the statute...
But then that would be so outrageous that someone would, of course, appeal it.
Well, I don't know. I'm saying if they were... Of course, but I think they can... I think they can pretty much issue a final ruling, and it's not going to be second-guessed through other branches of New York government or federal government.
And for those of you out there with speech impediments, I'm just fucking around, and I picked that out of my ass for we're not saying that we should deny people anything because they have speech impediments.
No, but what
don't at me, bro.
What I am saying is that speech impediments are not included as a protected class.
Right.
There are certain protected classes within the law: race, gender, sexual orientation. Right.
People with disabilities.
Certain types of
with
disability. I don't think the lisp is included, and we'll see.
We have to look at that.
Okay, number 19. Approve the opening of a new license application, period, and when new or additional licenses are made available pursuant to this chapter, provided, however, that the initial adult use cannabis retail dispensary license application, period, shall be open for all applicants at the same time. That means that what's going to happen is they're going to say, okay, the period it's open now for now, whether you're a venture capitalist with a lawyer at your back, or you're a guy from the project selling dime bags, everybody's going to be on equal playing field. Nobody knows what that application is going to look like. Now, we can look at New Jersey, we can look at California, we can look at our other jurisdictions and kind of begin to prepare ourselves in that way, but at the end of the day...
And again, the cynic in me says, nobody ought to know what it looks like, but people have connections.
I don't think they've even drafted it.
Oh, no, I mean, at this moment, no one has a clue, because it doesn't exist.
And I think you're being a little too cynical here.
No, I said I'm speaking as a cynic.
Because first they have to appoint the board. And do you think those people in the board this is, okay, well, now we're going to digress for a minute. This is why I don't like that the people on the board can't have equity interest in marijuana businesses, because that incentivizes them. That incentivizes them to take bribes. Okay? That incentivizes them to pervert justice a little bit. Like, if they're making millions of dollars from their marijuana business, then they're not going to be inclined to take
But then
a
they
bribe.
would be inclined to kind of skew things, and it's kind of similar to nepotism. I mean, if I've got an inside interest, I'm going to game the system a little bit to make me a little more equal than the others.
But I think if you look at, we spoke about this last week in terms of the process by which the voting members are appointed. It's so rigorous. It's so. I don't think that it really minimizes any possibility for that. At least in terms of like year one. At least maybe it'll devolve into that, but not right now. Okay, so they can. So it's all going to happen at the same time.
Right.
Everybody's going to have to apply at the same time. Nobody's going to have a competitive advantage.
No early opportunities.
Unless what Cornell's saying,
And again, I'm not saying that is. I'm just devil's advocate.
Little skepticism. Been around the block a few times.
Yeah, I'm the voice. We New Yorkers. You know how it is. It's like, tell me about it.
20 is complicated. Approve any price quotas or price controls set by the executive director as provided by this chapter.
About the numbers.
I don't like that. I let the market sort itself out. I don't think the legislature has any business setting any prices or telling us what we should or should not sell cannabis for.
Again, this is supposed to be laissez-faire capitalism, supply and demand. Let the market, the invisible hand of the market, etc., and so forth.
That's one thing where I will say, well, what they're saying is that they can do it. They're not saying that they're going to do it.
Right.
But I don't think that they setting price quotas. Is that? What about gasoline? Is there any provisions in the law where the government can
only under emergency circumstances.
Under emergency circumstances, but under normal circumstances, is there any? Where can the government set price quotas on? Can they do it for alcohol? Can they do it for tobacco?
No. The only to the example of gas, the only thing they can do is if there's a clear and obvious effort to fix prices unfairly, they can intervene, but they can't say, "Here's the limit. You can't charge any more or less than this." They don't have that.
So. Yeah, price quotas, price controls set by the executive director. I gotta say, that's a little scary, man.
See, and again, folks, this is soft clay right now. This isn't baked in the oven. So, if you disagree with it, and I happen to lean towards Sean's resistance to this, speak up. Speak up and say, you know what? Yeah, nah.
But even you and I are kind of on, like, I'm probably a little more conservative than you, and we're both looking at that a little askance.
Hey, hold up there.
So, I mean, if I were to question anything that we've read thus far, then say, I don't know about that.
The born-again capitalist in me cringes. It's like, hey, whoa, no. This is an existing market that has regulated its own prices for decades. We don't need y'all.
Yeah, but then let's look. What happens if something totally outrageous happens? What if the venture capitalists come in and start selling it at, I don't know.
Undercutting the little guys to drive them out.
I'll announce for $5 or whatever. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously. But Carnegie. Who was the oil baron? Was it Carnegie that was the oil baron?
No, it was
Rockefeller. No.
It was Rockefeller with Standard Oil.
With Standard Oil, and didn't he do exactly that?
Yeah.
Wouldn't he open up like?
Carnegie was steel.
But didn't he? And again,
they've price fixing. That's how they created monopolies.
So that's how they created monopolies. So maybe that is maybe that provision is there only if the predatory venture capitalists try to establish a monopoly. But if that's the case, then they should have spelled that out more explicitly.
Well, again, let's get on their case and say, what is that, 20?
That's number 20.
I say, section 20, could we have a little more clarification on that?
But again, like, let's say they started doing that, that would be the first thing. I'm sure I would have to do some research, but there's all kinds of antitrust and there's all kinds of precedent dealing with price fixing by the government, and I'm sure that if they do something unfair, I'm sure there's a mechanism, a legal mechanism by which we
I agree, and I'm saying let's not just depend on them to do what's fair. Knowing that this section is in there, if this starts to happen, let us immediately set up the clarion call and say, hey, hello, section 20, y'all need to step in here and intervene.
Moving on. 21. Approve the office's social and economic equity plan pursuant to section 84 of this chapter. 84 is where they talk about, what that means, social and economic equity applicants. But again, they're talking, they're going to have a social and economic equity plan. Did they have that in Illinois? Did they have that in California? Do they have that in the other jurisdictions? I don't know. I
think Illinois, once they saw the revenue, they said, hey, let's do something social equity based, given that we have all of this money. But I don't think that was originally
a priori.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And then 22 is very interesting, if not enigmatic, and it speaks to the deep history. It speaks to the fact that every aspect, I think, of any law touches upon the macrocosm. Okay, and you'll see what. To enter into tribal state compacts with the New York State Indian nations and tribes, as defined by Section 2 of the Indian law, authorizing such Indian nations or tribes to acquire, possess, manufacture, sell, deliver, transport, distribute, or dispense adult use cannabis and or medical cannabis. It shows you that to this day there's a special relationship between the state of New York and the Native American tribes on this land. You know, I know that Julia Salazar, one of the sponsors of this bill, is very active in terms of her advocacy around Palestine. And, you know, you can't... This statute even touch... You know, we're talking about reparations, and these are not things that happened in the past. They're things that are happening right now.
Right.
How we dealt with the indigenous population of America is still something that we have to address right now. You know, it's just saying we don't have to go too deeply into that right now. It's just saying, you know, it's saying we're you know, we have to take into consideration the Native American tribes
and the fact that they thought it through to that level. Because I'm here like, oh shit, yeah, right.
I wonder if it was thought through to that level in the other. Well, I guess it might. Like if it ever gets legal in, you know, Las Vegas or you know,
Wyoming
places,
or Utah, the Dakotas.
Okay, 23. Powers of delegation. With the exception of promulgating rules and regulations, so with the exception of that, all rules and regulations are coming from the Cannabis Board. They cannot delegate that to anything else. Okay. The Board shall have the power to delegate any functions, powers, and duties as provided for in this section to the Executive Director of the Office of Cannabis Management. So they can kind of just pass everything off to
you handle this.
You deal with this. Except making the rules. They have to make the rules.
Okay.
Any such delegation shall be through a resolution voted on and approved by the board members.
Okay.
24. The board shall, 2 years after the first retail sale pursuant to this chapter, review the impact of licenses issued pursuant to Article 4 of this chapter with substantial market share for any category of licensure to determine if such licensees are impairing the achievement of the goals of inclusion of social equity.
And just in case
licensees.
anyone's fallen asleep from this, let's buzz back real quick and just recap what Section 4 covers. Was that the one where there was the 50% and the
We haven't gone to Article 4 yet.
Oh, Article 4, not Section 4.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
My
Right. No,
mistake.
Article 4 deals with like social and economic equity
okay,
applicants.
So
that's a whole. That's actually probably the most significant thing that we're going to dive into.
Okay.
And this is all preparatory for us to really get into that.
Right, yeah. Okay.
So, but you know, look, to just give you kind of what is a social and economic equity applicant, I'm defining it personally very broadly to include anybody who's been working in the marijuana industry for over a year and who has any kind of market share.
Right.
An existing marijuana operator as contrasted with someone who sees an opportunity and wants to swoop down into it. Now, obviously, the statute goes into much more detail and gives a lot more credence to, you know, for instance, African Americans, Latinx, and people, you know, disproportionately impacted by the drug trade. But the point is that
by the drug laws.
By the drug laws, right? Not the drug trade. By the drug laws. Excuse me. But the point is that they're saying that, you know, after 2 years, they're going to take a look and see what's going on.
Yeah. Is this doing, not is because this is just a legislature.
Yeah.
Is the implementation accomplishing the intention and objectives?
Yes.
And they're going to look at this 2 years out and say, hold up, so to see what do we need to fine tune, what do we need to tweak?
I mean, what would they do at that point if there's market dominance, if there's monopolies, if the social economic equity applicants have gotten pushed aside? What are they going to do at that point? I don't know. But the fact is they're planning for it.
Right.
They're saying maybe this won't go down so smoothly, and they're giving themselves the opportunity.
And again, it's not just up to them. So understand they've got a built-in review. Right. Don't wait for the 2 years.
Right.
Stay on it and stay on them.
Well, I'm saying don't wait 18 months. Don't wait for a license.
Yeah.
Act now. Yeah. You know, make yourself an attractive candidate. Like what I'm saying is if you do what we're saying, if you've been operating for more than a year, if you're making $30,000 to $50,000 a year already, if you incorporate, put taxes aside in an escrow fund, and begin making charitable contributions, and then apply for a license, and they say no, isn't that an injustice? Isn't that an injustice on its face?
Yeah, because if that ain't a social equity applicant, then tell me who the hell is.
So what I'm saying is do that, and then we will appeal it, and we will win. But what they're saying here is like they're kind of assuming that there's no Sean Kalish and Cornell Green to help everybody out. That the venture capitalists come in and do it's everybody's worst nightmare. So this is I suppose they're saying that they'll reevaluate and say maybe we need to make some adjustments here. How they would make those adjustments, I don't know. I think a conservative would be a little concerned that they're giving themselves this power retroactively to attack the marketplace after the chips have sorted themselves according.
But then there's all sorts of regulations, particularly in financing. Investment banks and so forth. So this is not unprecedented.
No.
That's why there are antitrust laws, et cetera and so forth.
Thank you, actually, because that's where the conservative that's what I would respond to any conservative mind attacking the legislation is saying, well, no, like you have to consider antitrust laws.
Yeah.
Like there is unfair competition. There is unfair business practices that you do have to guard the marketplace from, and these are special circumstances where extra action needs to be taken to protect the existing operators by the government. All right. Achieving the goals of the fairness for small businesses and distressed farmers, adequate supplies of cannabis, and prevention of dominant marketplace participation in the cannabis industry. This is the last provision, by the way, that we're going to read. The board may modify the terms of the licensee's license consistent with the determination and to better achieve those goals. Any such modification may be appealed by the licensee for a formal hearing. Again, there's due process. Anytime they do something, there's a way to have a hearing.
And so to those cynics out there who have already publicly said that the game is stacked and it's rigged and so that the licenses are going to be... You're hearing it right here. If you want to lay down and give up, that's up to you. But there is in this legislature language that says that if what you greatly fear, and I'm not saying it isn't likely to happen or possible to happen, but again, you don't have to lie down and take it. When this review process comes in, and as we're saying, stay on top of everything to see that it doesn't get to that. But even if outside forces come in and try to dominate the market, this law says we're not just going to let that happen and accept it.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, if you don't want to hire me, right, listen to this podcast. Apply for the license. If you are denied, file an appeal and do your best to go through the appellate process. And that's how you protect yourself. And I really think that if you do everything that we're saying, I don't think that they're going to turn around. I mean,
and I'm projecting more to the macro, and I'm saying let's say 2 years out, and there has been some undue influence by the outside forces. You don't say, well, see, fuck it, told you. No, they're saying, no, we're going to examine this, and if that's what's happened, they're saying they're going to restructure the licenses.
Excuse me, you're right. You're saying that, like, in worst case scenario, if that's what happens, we will still have some kind of recourse. We can still submit a brief to the Cannabis Board asking them for them to take certain types of actions to correct the injustice.
And again, as I said, they're going to be doing that report in 2023 to see what the effects are. And in Section 24, that says if we see that it didn't match up to the intentions, we'll even restructure the licenses if we have to.
Right.
But none of this happens if you don't hold their feet to the fire and make them do it. And this is why we're going through all of this, to show you what's out there. So don't say, oh, well, you know how it goes. No, this is how it goes. But it only goes how you make it go.
So speaking to that hearing, if it goes that for any licensee, such review shall include violations of New York State labor law and labor peace agreements. Further, an existing collective bargaining agreement shall not be infringed or voided by any licensee who, after such review, suffers from a reduction in market share. That's actually, they're protecting themselves. They're saying that, if they take, what they're saying is they will have, what that means is that they will have real teeth. that they can actually what that means is that, like you said, 2 years down the line, the shit hits the fan. The venture capitalists have
gobbled it up,
and the social and economic equity applicants have,
they've been shafted.
They've been really shafted. So now what it's saying is that the state can go and say, okay, all these people who we gave those licenses to, we're taking that away from them and giving them to someone else. And you can't now say that was some sort of unfair labor practice,
right,
or that we've done anything that you can sue us for as the government. So they're giving themselves some real teeth 2 to 3 years down the line to make sure that what I'm hoping is that the process is as smooth as possible.
Yeah.
That the social and economic equity applicants do take 50% of at least of the licenses.
But y'all got to get your stuff together, and y'all got to apply for those licenses, man. They're not going to fall out of the sky like manna from heaven.
But as far as you and I are concerned, like what that last provision speaks to is us. Is like, well, we'll still have work, even if things like shit,
Yes.
even if it goes totally south, and we can't do what we're trying to do right now. Excuse me. We will rediscuss in 2 to 3 years and come up with another plan as to how to correct it.
Because we ain't giving up until things work out right. And
Right.
yes, we have a profit-based interest in this, but it's not. There's lots of ways we could make money. We're already making money, but this is an opportunity to make a profit because we're born-again capitalists and to do the right thing. They're not mutually exclusive.
If we wanted to just make money,
yeah,
we would try to get as many clients as we could on a $30,000 retainer just to go
market
through
rate.
the license application.
With no promise that you're even going to get a license.
That is not our business model. Our business model is you hire us and we will walk you through the process of incorporation and taking every action necessary to establish yourself as a legitimate business entity and to conduct business legally, transparently, going forward.
Yeah.
That is
Yes.
that is essentially our business
to give
model.
you the greatest possibility of positioning yourself as one of the social equity applicants that this law is designed to favor and to bolster.
Correct. So, I think that there must be thousands of them out there, but I think a lot of them are just not, taking this moment particularly seriously. We're looking for the few who are. That's essentially what we're doing. And the few who we're looking to take on, we hope become class representatives.
Yes.
So, for instance,
Because somebody's got to be the first one through the door, and then a lot of the other folks who, let's face it, life has made them cynical, not without good reason, beating them down a little bit. So they're like, you know what? I ain't trying to. I've heard this before. I've been made promises. I've just been slapped in the face. But if a couple of people go through, it's like, wait, hold up. This is worked out for some folks?
Well, I think now that we have 4 episodes down, I think it is time for me to start doing a series dedicated specifically to business strategy and not focusing so much on the legislation. It's also time for you and I to begin to approach the various market verticals that I wanted to. I'll begin to lay some of them out right now. The tobacco store owners, the Yemenis tobacco store owners as a class, I think are very attractive social and economic equity applicants, and the African American and Latinx operators within the projects, within the housing projects. NYCHA housing projects in New York City are a very attractive class because that can then, if we take them as a class, we can then focus so much of the discretionary revenue into those communities directly.
Yes.
Which is what I want to do. But I don't want to necessarily go on and on about business strategy right now.
Right.
Thank you for listening to us thus far.
Yes.
Next week we'll dive further into Article 2, continue to explore the Office of Cannabis Management. This is a relatively slow process. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take time for you to digest the statute
We
with
told
us.
you from the beginning, folks, this ain't TikTok. This is going to take a bit to slog through, but it's with good reason. I'm learning something new every episode.
Yeah.
And there's a lot into this. And I think it's important for us to understand. And again, I'm always going to rhetorically play the part of the cynic to address the the naysayers and the cynical voices. Because look, there's good reason. Look, I'm a black man in America. I lived in the Jersey Shore in the 80s. I've been pulled over for public negritude. In 2010, I got arrested.
So have I. I'm sorry.
You idiot. I got arrested in 2010 in the Bronx for walking through a park. Now, granted, it got thrown out of court, and the white judge who heard the court said, wait, consideration, acquittal with a consideration of dismissal? What do you mean consideration? He's a 48-year-old man at the time. He's walking through a park. He's got no criminal record. To hell, the cops could have just told him to walk out. So I know what it is.
I was joking because obviously I'm not black, so I wasn't arrested for being black. But I was arrested just for walking down the street. I've been arrested because they knew.
It's not just a thing that happens to black folks, But my point is, I understand what it is to have a cynical mindset, and I understand why one would look at this and say, yeah, bullshit, heard this all before. Mm-hmm. But I'm sitting here every week on this podcast, and I'm listening, and I'm deliberately, look, I'm a literate and pretty erudite person. I could read this myself. None of this is Old English or Latin.
Right.
I'm deliberately waiting for each episode to hear what Sean is digesting. Mm-hmm. Because I want to play the part of every man. I want to play the part of you. I want this to come at me, newly heard, right here live in front of the camera.
Well, that's it, right. That's our thing, right? So Cornell is not reading the I'm reading the statute. I'm studying the statute. I'm analyzing it. I'm going through it before I present it to you. Cornell is not.
Right.
Because he's a literate, reasonably intelligent layman.
Yeah.
To process this and for you.
Exactly.
Right.
Just to demonstrate that this is not some obfuscated, bunch of gibberish. When we hear it, when we see it, when we explore it and examine it, this is something that is designed to work for you, but nothing does what it intends to do unless the people who implement it make it so.
And that's yet to be determined. Yeah. How you ultimately act as a class is yet to be determined. Right. I think in the other jurisdictions, up until this point, California, etc., it really was not a proactive approach by the class of marijuana operators. Right. They were kind of just like, all right, we'll see what happens, and then
that's the law. Okay.
And then there were
not for nothing in the early aughts. So I got a bunch of friends from high school that are now living in San Francisco, and all of a sudden, everyone somehow had a prescription for glaucoma.
Well, so in terms of the proactive things that people would do, a couple of doctors were like, "Oh, well, I should start, giving
script. It's something. Everybody's got glaucoma.
All right,
and
so
I've been wearing glasses since I was 2 years old. None of my friends have a damn thing wrong with their eyes, but they all had glaucoma prescriptions.
But I think New York has an opportunity to do things a little differently. I'm actually have a lot of, perhaps too much confidence in the class of marijuana operators to really surprise the legislature and the company in terms of the extent to which they can come together and operate strategically to maximize the impact of the statute.
See, I was kind of wondering about that until today, until you read through those 24 sections, and hearing specifically the language that's in there, I now really, more than ever before in our conversations, understand. Granted, it's still going to depend on all those individual people out there.
But the intent, you understand now the intention of the legislature.
It's there. It's
and where
in
they're
there.
Coming from.
And if it doesn't become so, that's because we didn't make it happen.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, we will not be able to blame the government.
Right.
But again, we'll see. Like, because the government, there's a bunch of different branches here. The legislature, and the governor and the elected bodies are pretty much doing. What are the courts going to do? What are the cops going to do?
Right.
What are the feds going to do?
Right. Well, it looks like, we see what the cops are doing. At least here in New York City. I don't know about in Buffalo or Albany or Syracuse. But here in New York, they're just like, I never gave a crap about marijuana anyway, man. Something less I have to hassle myself for.
Well, and now they can focus on, you want to see what unmitigated drug abuse looks like. Go to Washington Square Park at 1 o'clock in the morning on Monday evening. That's what I said to you last episode.
Yeah.
And what you'll see in the center of the park is all the potheads, and what they're doing. They might get a little crazy and start fornicating in the street. Some of the really, really, really crazy ones do that. Okay. But then what you want to do is you want to go towards the the northwestern side and see the crackheads and what they're doing. and how that contrasts with the marijuana smokers.
Yeah.
So there's a real difference between marijuana and alcohol and every other type of drug. So, we can be excited about this without being overly concerned that there are going to be severe consequences for it.
And so many other states. So, I mean, guys, I remember the big one was when Colorado legalized it, and there was all sorts of doomsayers like, oh, you're going to have criminals coming into your state, and the crime rate's going to go up. None of that happened. In fact, the only really deleterious effect was water shortage because of all the hydroponics. But they not only made a lot of tax revenue money, marijuana tourism. Because Colorado was already famous for people coming there to ski and whatever have you, but they had so many people visiting the state to get high, the beds and breakfasts and restaurants and hotels and entertainment, all boom. See, there's so many ancillary benefits
Right.
of when you legalize something. And as I mentioned in one of the points when I was talking about the various products, let's stop just thinking about people smoking weed or eating edibles. Let's think about all of the other products. Oils and distillates from hemp can be made into plastic with much less effect on the environment.
We're going to get into that in
yeah.
another show.
So-
Like the other types of industrial
Yes.
and applications of
Yes.
marijuana, whether it's construction or medical or
Yeah.
whatever.
And just
Yeah.
point being, when we say we're talking about becoming legitimate businesses, we're not just talking about becoming weed sellers. Right now, we're addressing that, and that is the focus of the MRTA. But we're saying think even beyond that. Think really, don't think of yourself as some side hustler who's out there selling dye bags on the street. Think 2 generations down where you're leaving behind a business to your grandchildren.
Right.
That's what we're talking about. Because that, my friends, is social equity. And that's where reparation comes in. When we repair our mindsets and stop thinking of ourselves as criminals who are just going to go in the revolving door of the system and be incarcerated. And all I can do is sell drugs, has got a record, can't get a legitimate job. Stop that bullshit.
Yeah.
Think of yourself as a business baron. Think of yourself as leaving behind an enterprise to your descendants.
And to the extent that there's any confusion around that, give us a call and we will explain to you the exact process that you have to go
Exactly.
through and put you in that position. I think that's a good place for us to put a pin in it. All right,
Good.
man.
See you guys next week.
See you next week.